Hi, it's Vera Krischik here. Today is on November 18th. This is part of the MNLA recertification event, 11:15 to 12, a 45-minute talk. I'm really sorry. I've been sick all week and I finally tested myself this morning and I have COVID, so I'm not supposed to show up there for 5 days. So I went and made a video meeting with my lab manager. So hopefully this will work. So I have two talks. This one is IPM and landscape and turf. And I want to start out with these beautiful beetle pictures, and I have a message here to give you. And the first two are something we don't bump into in landscapes. Those are corn rootworms, and they feed on soybean and corn. And the adults are defoliators on leaves, and they pupate in the soil. And the larvae feed on roots. The adults feed on leaves and they pupate in the soil. Next one is Colorado potato beetle, which is on mostly potato. And it does the same thing, only the larvae also feed on leaves. The next one is asparagus beetle. It does the same thing, pupates in the soil. The larvae and adult feed on leaves. And those four different species are in the family Chrysomelidae, which means shield covering. And what I want you to understand from this is that beetle life history is very conservative. That if you can identify a beetle to a family, or if you can identify any insect group to a family, then you right away know their life history, and it's going to be easier to manage them. These Colorado potato beetle, the asparagus beetle, and the two corn rootworms, you can always manage them on leaves because the adults and sometimes the larvae feed on the leaves. It's much harder to manage something in the soil. The last one is different. That's a Japanese beetle in the family Scarabaeidae. And I want you to look at the antenna of the other four on the left. And you see, we call that filiform antennae. They're all evenly spaced. And you see the last one, the end of the antennae kind of has a net on it. And we call that a lamellate antennae. And that's characteristic of the family Scarabaeidae and related families. So again, if you start to know insects by the family they're with and associate some of the traits we use to identify those families, it's going to be much easier to. And why do I tell you this? Because knowing the family of insects, the life history or how they feed on roots or leaves, it's very conservative. They do similar things. And so it's going to be much easier for you to come up with IPM programs. From the beginning, I want to make sure that we're on the same page, that IPM is site specific. So every time you have a pest, it has a slightly different life history. It feeds on different crops of different economic value. For us in landscape, if it's in small populations and it's not really defoliating very much, we can just let it stay there and let the biocontrol. So understanding life history, how that insect interacts with its host plant. And that is a major part of this lecture today, is trying to help you understand life history so you can do predictive IPM. So new and old exotic pests are invading trees and turf as climate changes and pests move north. Minnesota is experiencing more pest issues. We will discuss the life history of these new and old exotic pests, their IPM and their cultural and chemical management. Especially in landscapes, we want to have a minimum pesticide use so we can control the pest by natural means with natural biocontrol. In ag production, it's completely different. In order to have enough economic value, make as much money, people use a lot of pesticides. But we don't have to do that. And there are certain pesticides that kill certain groups of insects very easily without killing their biocontrol agents, the predators, parasitoids, that kill them. So in landscapes, we want to be very, very conservative. And if we do use insecticides, we want to use those that have a minimal effect on good bugs. So here's the outline of my talk. We're going to first talk about resources for you on my website, then what is IPM, then how to develop IPM programs that conserve pollinators and the top insect pests. So if you understand bird, bee, butterfly, beneficial insect conservation, it's basically the same. It's basically create habitat for bees or good bugs. It all has to do with flowering plants and the rewards of pollen and nectar. Even this little dandelion in the center, that we in landscapes are told, you know, you want to put down herbicides to kill them. There's this new wave of using bee lawns where you encourage herbaceous plants, short herbaceous plants to grow, and they produce pollen and nectar. And so a lot of people are trying to get away with less herbicide use. Remember, herbicide use only started in the 50s. Bee lawns have been in Europe for at least 200 years. And any of you who've gone to St. Andrews in Scotland, where golf courses began, they have bee lawns. Their turf on their golf courses is not uniform, one grass, one species. It has plenty of herbaceous plants in it. So we're trying to get away in landscapes from herbicide use. Clearly, if you manage a golf course, that somebody is going to be really upset if their ball hits a herbaceous plant and moves the trajectory of the ball or slows it down. That's completely different because that's a commodity now. And just like turf or corn, just like corn or soybeans, you have to manage it with higher chemical inputs. So on the bottom left, that bee with the white stripes on its abdomen, that's what a ground nesting bee looks like. But again, you need to know that from wasps. That in the center is ground nesting wasps, and those can come out. Those are what you see right there is the horde that sit at the nest, the entrance, and they fly out and bite you and sting you in the nose. And through evolution, those guard wasps have evolved. But with these little solitary bees that you see in the bottom picture on the left, that's not going to happen. They live alone. They make a ball of pollen, a little leaf, they lay an egg on it, and they are only out for about a month a year. So bee lawns in orchards, we're trying to get people to reconsider pesticide use, reconsider insecticide use, and have multiple species, have high species diversity of ground covers. In the bottom right, those are native bees that are stem nesting bees. They actually do the same thing that the bee on the left would. The bees on the right do the same thing in stems of trees or inside a stem of a herbaceous plant. So the whole thing right now is trying to understand life history and IPM to conserve pollinators. So just to let you know, I go to Menards and I see these for sale, and these are a good idea. Butterfly boxes don't work, bee boxes don't work, but these stem nesting bee boxes do work. And the outer red structure here is just a way to hold these stems. You have to clean them out, put them back in every year in July or June. Probably June's better. And here in the middle, you see this one has leaves. This one has packed some soil in there. And there's this little native bee going in there to make a pollen ball with some leaves, lay an egg, and next year you get another stem nesting bee. I just want to remind people in landscapes, when we retrofit them, we have the option to put in new plants. And this is Campsis radicans trumpet creeper. This is Dropmore scarlet honeysuckle. They are the only two landscape plants that hummingbirds really need. And I encourage you to retrofit landscapes with them. Hummingbirds are going to disappear. My next talk's on climate change, and we're going to talk about that. They need nectar, else they're not going to survive. They used to follow up north these birds called sapsuckers that would make holes in the trees in the summer. They would fill with sap in the spring when the sap comes up for the roots. And then the sapsuckers themselves and the hummingbirds that fly back from Mexico with them would feed on that sap. But the sapsuckers are in major decline. And so really, without nectaring plants, we're not going to have hummingbirds. So if you can retrofit, please do. And so here's just another picture of one of these stem nesting bees making a beautiful little circle. He's going to carry that back to the ground or to those little straws. It's going to put some pollen in the center. It's going to lay an egg. And so when you see this damage on a rose, these bees are only out for a week, 2 weeks. You don't have to manage them. They're never going to cause that rose plant to die or lose flowering because they're just taking away surface area. And plants, these are all little solar panels, and plants have too many solar panels. If you would use a neonic that is systemic, you're absolutely going to kill these. And again, you're going to affect a diversity. A lot of the data now tells us in apple management, these ground nesting, stem nesting bees are better than honeybees in managing in pollinating apples. So I have these 3 websites for you. We have a course every spring with MNLA on how to get a certification manual, how to get certified with MDA. We have a pollination conservation website, and we have IPM resources for professionals like yourself. You're going to get a handout online of this slideshow, and so you can then use it to navigate and bookmark these sites. And I'm always putting information up for you to be able to identify pests, know those insecticides that are very specific and conserve beneficials, including pollinators, and understanding how to make site-specific IPM programs. So this is what the pollinator conservation site looks like, the first page. This is what the IPM for landscape and nursery. This older site that's been up for 10 years is discontinued now. And this IPM for professionals is really important because it has the pesticide. This link is to the pesticide registered in Minnesota. This one goes to a website that tells you if your pesticide choice is compatible with conserving beneficials. This here is for the labels. And this is, I've compiled, and I update it every year. I've compiled this on those pesticides and insecticides that conserve beneficials that aren't toxic to them. So you can download this. These links mean either you can navigate there or download them. This is an IPM because we've had landscape managers down in Egan who have found rusty patch bumblebee in their property. And once you find an endangered species, you have to work with the MDA on a management program so you don't kill rusty patch bumblebee. So you really are on the vanguard of conserving species diversity in urban landscapes. You have a very pivotal role. So we have this IPM landscape manual. You can click on any of these links and get everything I'm talking to you about life history, how to manage the pests. Do they have biocontrol? If biocontrol is not important, then you need to apply some beneficial insect-friendly insecticide. So it is really impossible when I just talk to you for an hour for you to get all this information, but it is all on the website. This is a bit about the Minnesota threatened and endangered species, power sheep skipperling, Carner blue, rusty patch bumblebee, Dakota skipper, yellow banded bumblebee, monarch. So monarch almost made it to the endangered species list. It is being reconsidered all the time, but monarch populations, especially this year, because of the drought and the lack of host plants for nectaring on the return to Mexico, the populations are going to plummet. So here are our basic parts of IPM. Inspection and monitoring. Do you have a pest issue? If you just have that damage we saw from that little bee, that native bee that takes the crescents out of a rose leaf, you don't have to manage that. Forecasting weather. What is the weather like? What can that tell you about pest outbreaks? Thresholds. When you see a pest, how many do you have to have before you consider managing them? And education, going to these workshops like the one you're today and other workshops, and record keeping on every property. You should keep a record of what you find each year, what your management was. You should check it that it worked, and then go back the next year and see if you have that pest problem again. Without keeping records, you have no idea because you have so many properties. So again, on that website on pollinators is all this information about stem nesting bees. Here's a bee in the ground. Here's a stem nesting bee. These are all native. These are in the family Megachilidae called mason bees. And these are, like I said, vital in pollination of apples and other fruits. We have posters for you to download for the office. We have a butterfly gardening. So please go to that website for resources. So now what is IPM? Well, IPM is a system utilizing multiple methods. It's decision making. You have to decide, do you have enough biocontrol to manage your pests? Or do you need to apply beneficial insect-friendly insecticides? Or do you need to go to very toxic insecticides? It's a risk reduction system. So in landscapes, we're not eating these commodities. We're just trying to make them pretty. So we have a much wider range of the number of pests we can have. It's information intense. You have to have my website and other people's websites. You have to understand the life history, how the pest, what stages are out, what time of year. And so there's a lot that goes on in terms of educating yourself on IPM programs. IPM is cost effective. We always want to make sure that if we say that you use a certain biorational insecticide that doesn't kill pollinators, that it isn't toxic to good bugs, but that it also doesn't hurt It doesn't hurt beneficials, and it is cost effective, that for what you apply and how much it costs, it's going to work. IPM programs are site specific. They use multiple tactics: cultural, which would be management of the environment, physical control, genetic, putting out crab apples that are resistant to apple scale, using biological control, encouraging those native pest predators and parasites out there to kill the pests. And the last resort is chemical control, first using biorational insecticides, second using traditional conventional insecticides. You always want to use the least toxic pesticide first, and you always want to make sure you just spot treat areas and that you're conserving beneficials. So here is a picture of something you can buy if you get hibiscus, which used to always come with whiteflies. In this little cardboard hanging tag are the parasitoids. Here they are coming out, and they attack the whiteflies, and it's amazing how they control the populations. What you always want to do is put something white. Some people use an umbrella they open up under a plant, or they use their clipboard and they knock the plant, and then they see who falls out. And that's one way to try to sort out if you need to manage anything. So what you want to avoid is use a soil test before you fertilize. Remember, over-fertilizing leads to plants that are full of nutrients, and that pest insects, really increase in numbers. Manage with IPM, which is not only involved, we just saw chemicals was last. Knowledge of the pest life history. How can I manage the environment culturally, which is not using as much fertilizer, or using slow release fertilizers. Plant nectar plants, not just for the bees and the butterflies, but also every one of those good bugs needs a nectar plant. So in the evolution of insects and plants, the insects had already radiated from the ocean onto land. They were mostly things that ate detritus, algae and things along water. And then as the plants started to radiate, and you went from the gymnosperms, the conifers, 150 million years ago, to the angiosperms, the plants with leaves, the insects radiated too. And so all of them in evolution, all insects need pollen and nectar, not just bees and butterflies, but all these beneficial insects. So retrofitting landscapes, as we just said, with some of those Campsis radicans, or those Dropmore scarlet honeysuckle, or retrofitting with different kind of butterfly bee gardens, water gardens, all of these are really helpful. We want more species diversity in urban areas. And in Minnesota, there is a lot of money and time spent on these bee lawns. And as I said, in St. Andrews, you're going to see bee lawns. They're turf with different flowering plants, as long as they're short. And so there's a big encouragement to put clover back in the mixes. And as soon as you do this, you can't use herbicides because they're going to kill the clovers. So put clover back, and a lot of these little plants that grow very flat. And that is a big emphasis in Minnesota, the legislature, to try to get people to stop herbicide use and use bee lawns instead of this herbicide intense management that started in the 50s. Again, if you have turf that is used for athletics, or you have golf course turf, or municipal turf outside the governor's house, then it's a commodity and you need herbicides. But if it's just the average person's backyard, or areas around school, it's much better to start decreasing herbicide and, of course, insecticide use. So spot treatments don't broadcast. Stay at least less than 8 miles per hour. When you took your license, you learned you're supposed to have an anemometer, and if the wind speed is above 8 miles per hour, you're not supposed to spray. Spray less, tolerate more. We use contact insecticides. Not systemics that get into pollen, nectar, and hurt everybody, not just butterflies and bees, but all those beneficial insects. Save money on herbicide use and add some of these micronutrients, these worm castings. I mean, they make a huge difference. I've been trying it in my backyard, and the turf gets a beautiful color, it gets vigorous. And as we know from our training to get our license, if the turf is healthy and thick, then it outcompetes those nasty weeds like plantain, or creeping things that lay over, like prostate knotweed. It gets rid of those. And promote bee lawns and decrease herbicide use. There's about 10 papers now that show herbicides are really affecting a sublethal dosage on native bees and managed bees like honeybees. So remember, bioration is the name we give to insecticides compatible with bees and beneficials. Organic, there's this misconception out there that organic insecticides are not toxic. No, they're just as toxic. They have to just be of a natural plant. So things like azadirachtin, which is from the neem tree, that is used as a conventional, as an organic insecticide. So you don't have to pay for organic insecticides. And you're probably saying to yourself, what insecticides is she talking about? That leaflet I showed you early on that's on the website will tell you what insecticides are compatible with beneficials that you can use in the landscape. And conventional insecticides are toxic to pests, they're toxic to bees. And in landscapes where we want native bees to take over, we want more butterflies and more beneficials to control our pests, then it's really good to stop using systemic insecticides, conventional, and switch to these biorational. They're all registered by the EPA. They're all registered for efficacy. It just takes a little more education, a little more remembering which one works best with pests. So remember that organic means it's governed by organic certification in every state. There's a federal program and a state program. There's the National Organic Standard Board, NOSB, and advises the National Organic Program. A certification agency obtains from the USDA certification, and then they go out and work with the individual farmers. So remember, anything that is organic has to be on this OMRI, the Organic Materials Research Institute list. And all those products that say organic, they have the organic label on them, and you see it up there in the corner, they are organic. But as I'm saying, you don't have to spend the money on that. There's a lot of other products that the active ingredient is used in organic, but it's also used in biorational insecticides that are cheaper to purchase. So here's just some list of OMR approved. A lot of these really aren't going to work for you. So the ones that will work pretty well are the pyrethrins, but you can use a pyrethroid like Tall Star. It's cheaper and it's just as effective. You can use spinosad. It comes in an organic form and a non-organic form. The non-organic form is conserved. It's cheaper. It kills all the little larval stages of beetles. It works really well. So you do have choices between organic, conventional, and biorational. And I want you to realize biorational is the cheaper choice, and it's just as effective. So the characteristics of biorationals, they have a short residual. They decompose very quickly by light, water, and microbes. We learned about this in the courses that I gave you with MNLA, or what the books you needed for your certification. They work on the smaller insects and matures. We rarely do not want you to try to control very mobile adults because it's hard. They're less harmful to beneficials, to predators, parasitoids, bees. They have low mammalian toxicity. They may take a little longer to kill a pest, a week versus a day, but they still are very effective, all the research out there. So these are just, realize BT is a protein crystal that lyses the gut. It is organic or it is a biorational, but there's different kinds of it. So there's one Krischik that's for moth, that's its trade name. There's another one, Xanthari, that's for moth. Tenebrionis is for beetles. You'd use this for Japanese beetle grubs in the soil or Japanese beetle adults. Here's another Galleria, which is for grubs. Israeliensis is for flies. So even though it says BT, there are slight differences basically in how they dissolve in alkaline versus acidic guts. So just read the label. It will tell you the pests that they work on. So let's put a biocontrol program together. Let's put a biorational IPM program together for you with your favorite pests in Minnesota. Probably the top of the list, what you all have to manage in the summer is Japanese beetle. So the adults feed gregariously. They, you see in the top picture there, they also go back to turf and mate gregariously. They give off pheromones, chemicals that are attractant to make them hang out with each other. This is the grubs. They're always that C-shaped, and that's just the size, and they feed on their back. Here's soil pulled back. So you know you have Japanese beetles if the grass is dead, but when you pull the soil back, there's no roots. And this is staged, they put them here, but once there's no roots, they're not there. They're off in the green area. So if you have damage from Japanese beetle, then you're going to probably have to manage it. They feed on over 300 plants and 80 families, and here's some on roses, blueberries, apples. So a lot of those plants in gardens and backyards. July 8th, the linden tree, July 18th, 10 days later. So they are a big problem with linden trees. There are these traps that have this pheromone lure, and this is the pheromone impregnated. It's like a pencil eraser, and this is rose extract, germanol, and they work so well, we tell you not to use them. We're doing some research to see if we can put pathogens in here and then let the beetles out, and that way we can spread pathogens for increased biocontrol. But that's some research we're working on right now. So there's a basic IPM program for Japanese beetle. You want to use the BT that we talked about, BT Galleria, grub begone. Japidemic doom does not work. The Bacillus populi is Japidemic doom. It worked back in the 50s. Nobody can get it to work. So don't buy that. Don't buy Bacillus populi, Japidemic doom. The new bacteria is Bacillus thuringiensis Galleria, under a couple trade names. One is beetle gone. So that would be an IPM program. You can still manage Japanese beetle with BT Galleria, or you can use spinosad, or you can, in the soil, you can use Bavaria bassiana. You have options. So the product that probably all of you use, the Dell product, GrubX, they have been very proactive. So before we had BT Galleria, currently BT Galleria is in GrubX. Before that, there was an IGR called halofenazide. Before that, there was a imidacloprid in the last 15 years. So you are managing, if you use GrubX, it's a fertilizer and a grub killer. That is biorational management. So a lot of you may be using it and don't realize it. So here's what they look like. Here is GrubX with this chemical called acelepryn. I'm sorry, I misspoke before. This is acelepryn, which is a new insecticide that's registered as diamide. If you wanted to get the BT Galleria, you'd have to go online and buy Grub Begone. But this is the Scott bought out Dow. And so this GrubX has been around for years in box stores, and it had halofenazide. Now it has acelepryn, which kills grubs in the soil, and it's very well, does very well. It used to be you had to put it on like 2 months ahead because it was highly insoluble in water. And now you can start putting it on in mid-July. So the adults come out in the beginning of July. You can start to apply it mid-July, and you'll get control through the summer. We want you to avoid the neonicotinoids, whether it's imidacloprid, merit, clothianidin, arena, thiamethoxam, meridian, or dinotefuran, xylam, because those all are long-lasting. They get in pollen, nectar, and kill beneficials. And so I just mentioned to you about rusty patch bumblebee. Here's how you tell. The workers have this brown patch. There's something called Bumblebee Watch. You can take a picture with your phone and see if you really have rusty patch bumblebee. But if you do have it, and this has happened in Minnesota, you need to work, if it's on the landscape you are managing, you need to work with the DNR and MDA to come up with a management program. You still can manage, cut the grass, fertilize, but only use insecticides. That won't kill rusty patch bumblebee, which used to be one of the most common bees, and now this is its limit. These are larger populations, and the crosshatches are where you still can find them. So you still can find them in Minnesota, but the populations are very small. And so here is my suggestion for biorations, acelepryn. It has a huge name for the active ingredient. You can use it for Japanese beetle grubs in the soil or on landscape plants. This is what is in GrubX. If you want BT Galleria, you have to buy the product Beetle Gone. Do not use Japidemic Doom or any of the products that have Bacillus populi, because it does not work anywhere. They still tell you that it works, but no researcher has found out that it works. Spinosad is under the trade name Conserve, and it works for caterpillars and sawflies. Neem oil, soaps and oils you can use on soft-bodied creatures like aphids or leafhoppers. And imidacloprid or dinotefuran, you still need that for borers. Now, they don't work well for clearwing borers. Those are Lepidoptera. They're not beetles. So you're wasting your money trying to use imidacloprid on a tree with clearwing borer. And we're going to talk about that in a second. We're going to see that difference, how you ID a clearwing borer versus a buprestid borer. This is the family Buprestidae. The larvae always have these very triangular sections to it. This is emerald ash borer larvae. That's emerald ash borer adult. We say they're dorsally flattened. So when they come out, they make a D-shaped exit hole. So the ventral area is still domed, but the top is flattened. And when they come out, they make a D shape, not a round. That's one of the first diagnostic characters to tell a clearwing borer versus a buprestid. A clearwing borer is the Lepidoptera borer, which you have to use different chemicals on. These are sawflies, and they're gregarious in the spring, and this spinosad up here is really a good product for them. And this is just the grubs in the soil. And again, you want to use the GrubX with acelyprin or use beetle gone, but don't use anything with Bacillus populi. So here's this grub bagan. You can get it sometimes in a box store, but it's easier to get online. And it's Bacillus thuringiensis galleria, and it works against all these scarab beetle larvae in the soil. All right, so Japanese beetle, the Department of Ag did release 2 biocontrol organisms, a fly called Isachetta, a diptera means fly, and a wasp called Typhia vernalis, a hymenoptera. Neither of them worked very well. And so this is the wasp. It flits around over the grass at night. It lays the eggs in the grubs. And then this is a picture of the wasp. In Maryland, where I come from, you can see them. You don't have to release them. They're there naturally. In China, they do parasitize white grubs, but they like to be around water, and they have certain host plants they like for nectar and pollen that we don't have. So that didn't work out. And then we tried this fly, Isachetta aldrichii. It deposits 100 eggs during a period of 2 weeks. You can see the eggs on the thorax of the Japanese beetle. There'd be little white eggs. And again, it doesn't work very well. So biocontrol up till now hasn't worked. We have money to look at this pathogen, ovesicular populi. Michigan State has been working on this literally for 20 years. This is a biocontrol agent that gets inside the malpighian tubules, which is just a fancy way to say insect kidneys in their gut. It's established in Connecticut and New York. And when they've established it in Michigan, it caused 75% reduction in Japanese beetle over 15 years. And besides our state working on releasing them, Kentucky, Colorado, and Arkansas has introduced ovesicular. So hopefully we can come up with ways of using Japanese beetle traps to put the pathogen in there to get it to disseminate better. And we'll have very little Japanese beetle problems in the next 5 or 6 years. In the East Coast, where Japanese beetle first started in 1916, the outbreaks were kind of big in the 50s, 1950s. You hardly see it anymore because of these pathogens are controlling it in the soil. So we do have a program here in Minnesota to introduce that, and hopefully that will work. So now let's get to the top insects. What have been bothering you? So remember we talked about life history, and you want to manage insects by understanding their life history. So again, I have some beetles for you here. So this is elm leaf beetle. It was introduced from Europe, where it's killed naturally by Bavaria bassiana. And believe it or not, here you don't find it anymore. And if you do find it, it's full of Bavaria bassiana, which is a fungus. So that has caught up with it. It's also this Harmonia, this Asian ladybird beetle, which the university has done some research and made you think negatively about it. I want you to just ignore all that. There is nothing negative about it. It aggregates as all these coccinellid beetles that are predators do. It gives off a chemical. They aggregate because if a skunk or something finds them, a mouse, they release a chemical that smells badly, so less of the population gets eaten. But they're only a good thing. They're introduced in 1917 in pecan orchards to control aphids. Took till 1990 to get to Minnesota, but harmonia is a good thing. So the biocontrol, we hardly have any elm leaf beetle. These are the larvae on the leaf. It is gone because of Bavaria caught up with it and this Asian ladybird beetle. 9-bark beetle was around for a while. It's this beautiful orangey color. Sometimes they're bright orange, sometimes they're darker. And for a while there, they were selling 9-barks for landscapes, but they're not really winter hardy. The native 9-bark will live longer. This little beetle needs a place, a house. They need to go under the sides of houses to overwinter, else it's still a little cold here. So now that most of those 9-barks that were planted have gone, you don't find 9-bark beetle. But again, the adult and the larvae fed on the leaves of 9-bark. Here we have viburnum beetle. It looks pretty much like elm leaf beetle. It feeds on introduced exotic viburnums. It only shows up in populations here and there. And then this harmonia controls it by eating the eggs. So you may hear about it. Lots of times you read an article, oh, you know, worry, this pest is going to get here, but it never materializes. So that hasn't materialized in Minnesota or most places, the viburnum beetle. So again, in these site-specific IPM programs, I want you to know that you have to understand the life history and then what chemicals to use. So here is a weevil. It has no legs, right? No legs. Here's a Japanese beetle. It has legs. This is black vine weevil. This is billbug. This is a turf pest. And this is a pest of the roots of ornamentals. It likes yews. It likes herbaceous yews. It likes hostas. They come in the bottom of pots, but they're not hardy here. They disappear. So adults after May contact insecticides use chlorothalonitropol, acelepryn, or spinosad. You can use nematodes for the larvae in the ground. Conventionals would be imidacloprid and clothianidin, and you're just going to kill off all those predators. You don't want to revert to that. You want to first start with your biorationals. With black vine weevil, it's the same. They live in the soil, so you can use chlorothalonitropol, spinosad, or these nematodes. Japanese beetles, you can add this BT galleria to the chlorothalonitropol and spinosad, this grub begone BT galleria. So what understanding the life history is going to tell you is that Japanese beetle only comes out as grubs once a year. We start controlling them in July. Don't bother in the spring. It's really difficult to manage. Acelepryn, chlorothalonitropol, we used to think you had to apply it 2 months earlier. You don't. Black vine weevils only show up in the flower beds. You may have all these insects overwintering in a flower bed because the soil is loose and they want to, it's easier to make a little cell in the ground. But black vine weevil is the only one that really is going to attack a landscape plant. Billbugs go back, and in the spring they walk along the sidewalk, they go into the grass and they lay an egg that turns into this inside the grass sheath. And so individual clumps will start turning yellow. So again, this is what I mean about site-specific IPM programs, understanding the life history. This is impossible to invent yourself. So that's why we have these resources on the web for you. So let's go on a little more. People talk about invasive insects and they talk about exotic. And then can native insects be high risk? Is it just invasive? So let's talk about the family Buprestidae. These are the ones that make the D-shaped hole. You can see here they're flat, and then this is curved. And so when they come out, it's a D shape. These are all different species of Buprestid that feed on different species of trees. And this is our native one, two-line chestnut borer. It comes in after oak wilt on stressed trees, so you see it more. This is the one that is specific to ashes, emerald ash borer. This is flat-headed apple tree borer, which occurs in apple orchards. And this is bronze birch borer that is killed by our native birches because they either have chemicals in their bark or very tough bark, but it's in the European white birches, which you don't see anymore because they killed them all. So here's an example of bronze birch borer was a native, and it still reached very high population size, high risk. Flat-headed apple tree borer native can be high risk in apple orchards. Two-line chestnut borer, high risk because it follows oak wilt. And here is emerald ash borer. So understanding if it's an invasive or an invasive exotic or a native really doesn't allow you to predict. Most people say, oh, there's no biocontrol to manage the exotics. Well, when you have a borer inside the trunk of the tree, there is very few things to control them. And so you have to manage them with some kind of systemic insecticide, unfortunately, or you can spray on the bark, Onyx Pro, which is bifenthrin, or Astro, which is permethrin. So when the female chews on the bark, it kills them. But you have to know the life history of when those are out. And they have a very broad range of when the females are out. So it is difficult to manage, but on individual trees, you have the potential to manage with a systemic or permethrin, Astro on the bark, or Onyx Pro, bifenthrin on the bark. So again, let's get into the scarabs here. This is Japanese beetle, an exotic. This is a native. It's called masked chafer, and you see the little circles here, the mask. This is oriental beetle. It has these black stripes. Again, the Scarabaeidae. It has these nets on the end of antennae. They're not equal like a leaf beetle, like a Chrysometal leaf beetle. European chafer, we got a lot of news. New beetle hits Minnesota. European chafer going to devastate turf. And, you know, it will kill some turf, but if you don't apply too many insecticides, the natural enemies will slowly control it. This oriental beetle isn't here. This native beetle has been here forever, and it is never a pest. So again, what about natives versus exotics? Does it have to be an exotic to cause problems? No, this European chafer in Michigan, it's a problem in home lawns. We have some in Minnesota, keeps popping up here and there, but by and large, it's this Japanese beetle, which is an exotic. So it doesn't have to be this masked chafer is ubiquitous everywhere, but it's controlled by natural enemies in the soil, and so it never reaches a size that is going to cause a population problem. So again, here's another family, the Cerambycidae. These are called the longhorn beetles. You see the long horns, and again, invasive, exotic, native, what's the risk? So here on the top is an invasive, a beautiful one, it's huge. It's called the Asian longhorn beetle. It has these blue eggs, these spots. It sits very conspicuously on the side of maple trees. APHIS, the USDA program that's quarantine regulatory, goes around killing them. They show up all the time near ports, and they chop down all the hippocanthus, all the maple trees, because it's right now in Asia where it comes from, it feeds on different species, but in America it seems like maple trees and horse chestnut trees. So remember, we have Ohio buckeye, that's a horse chestnut basically. Here is a dogwood tree borer, ubiquitous in Minnesota, but you never know it's there because it gets in the terminal of dogwood trees and causes a shedding of the terminals. So all it does is prune the plant for you so it doesn't grow too fast. Here's elm borer, not very common. It doesn't like, well, now that we've lost our native elms, it's not that common. It doesn't like Siberian elms. And here's this little milkweed beetle. Again, they're called longhorn beetles because they have long antennae. And if you look, they're very round. So they're going to make a round exit hole. So that's how you tell it from the emerald ash borer, the two-line chestnut borer, and the family Buprestidae. All right, I think I have about 10 more minutes, so we're going to go on here. So if I had to put a risk here, I would say emerald ash borer, gypsy moth. These are both hemlock woolly adelgids. We don't have many hemlocks in Minnesota, so it's not an issue. European elm bark beetle, which already has killed most of the elms, so that's a done deal story. Erwinia is a pathogen of American ash. How many of you have seen many American ash over 20 years? They really does a job. It's vectored by honeybees. It gets on honeybees and it's vectored by honeybees. They feed on an infected plant. It's in the pollen. They move from plant to plant, move it around, and it causes the terminals to wilt, and in 1 week your plant is gone. Birch leaf miner sawfly, you really don't see it much anymore. 20 years ago, it was a big problem. This is an exotic from Northern Europe. Asian longhorn beetle, again, it's an exotic in a quarantine program. We don't have it here. We have Japanese beetle. We have spotted wing Drosophila, which gets on all the berries and the fruits. So cherries, blueberries, raspberries. Spotted wing lanternfly, it's not here yet. It's as far west as Ohio. It needs a tree called Ailanthus altissima, the Chinese tree of heaven. That's its favorite oviposition where it lays its eggs. That's a tree that grows on railroads and everything in the east. It's not winter hardy here, so we don't have its favorite host plant. Brown marmorated stink bug, I've had a bunch of them coming in my house this year. They feed on fruits and vegetables. That's an exotic. Asian giant hornet, they're doing everything they can to kill them when they find them up in Washington state. And you've heard about jumping worms. There's lots of articles out there how they destroy the soil. They were introduced as bait because they jump around, but they are voracious feeders, eating all the organic material, and they basically leave the soil like coffee grounds. So these are our top landscape pests. So let's learn a little bit about managing. So here is some ancillary pest that comes and goes in Minnesota. It's called a leather jacket. And it's a fly. It's a crane fly. It looks like a giant mosquito. And that's the larvae. And they're oviposited the eggs into the soil. And they overwinter December, January, deep in the soil. They come up just like Japanese beetle. And they feed on the roots of the grasses. So if you have them, you'll see a lot of these large crane flies. It causes damage that may be Japanese beetle damage to you. It may be fungal damage. But if you look for them, you'll find them. And they're rather large and goopy. And so if you dig for them, the management for them would be to apply some soil insecticide against flies. So what comes to mind right now for me is imidacloprid is really good against flies. That's systemic. I don't like to recommend imidacloprid, but sometimes you need to use them. So here it says they chew on the grass blade. This is the one taken out. Brown turf like Japanese beetle, acelepryn, that chlorothalonitropol, or imidacloprid, or nematodes can control it. So here's just a pictorial of the life history. The adults come out over 2 or 3 weeks in late August, September. They lay eggs. The larvae hatch and feed on the roots of grasses. They move down. They feed all summer. They pupate in late August, and then the adults come out and mate. So there's 2 different species. You don't have to know that, but just know that this appears now and then in Minnesota, and it can be easily managed. Soybean aphid. Why am I talking about soybean aphid? None of us manage soybeans because it's an interesting soil. Soybean aphid, here's the form here. They produce parthenogenically, no mating or anything, just a baby pops out. A 1-week-old aphid makes a baby already. This is the winged form that fly. Once a plant gets really decimated, they chemically, they change and they get wings and they fly off. And a lot of ladybird beetles came in to feed on them. And it's not much of a problem the last 2 years because they had a lot of biocontrol switched over to them. Cooler springs killed them as they emerged. So pests do come and go, and hopefully it's suppressed for a while, although soybeans never had much insecticides. So why am I telling you that? So that you understand that pests do come and go. It's not cycles. People always want to put on it some kind of idea that it's a cycle. It's not a cycle. They just come and go from different abiotic environmental conditions. So in Europe, and these are in 2015, Japanese beetle became a serious pest in Europe at 2 airports, Northern Italy at Piedmont and Lombardy. Remember, it's from Japan. And it probably came on planes from the United States. 220 in Rome. We sent pine tortoise scale that was killing all the Lombardy umbrella pines. It was a big deal. Monarch butterflies, they're all over the world. People ship them around. So this idea that pests are shipped around the world, it's never going to stop now that we have so much train travel, plane travel. So we are basically exporting exotics all over the world. We're getting them from other parts of the world. And this is not going to stop. It's just going to keep going on. So here's emerald ash borer. Again, you see the D shape. This is the family Buprestidae. These are the galleries underneath. We don't want to talk too much about it. It arrived in 1992 in Michigan. It was about 2000 we found it. 2009 it was found in Minnesota near the university. 100% fatal. It even goes into the really small DBH ash. 100 million ash tree. There's not good biocontrol for it. Pesticides, emamectin benzoate are injected in trunks, you know, in your favorite ash tree, but we don't have very good management for it. This is gypsy moth. This is the male. The female is white. She pulls the hairs off her body and puts them over her eggs, and the eggs hatch out. This is a gypsy moth larvae. And this is one that is controlled by Entomophaga mimega, which is a fungal pathogen from Europe and Asia. So the story goes that researchers went to a patch, gypsy moth researchers have yearly meetings. They went to look at a patch in Poland, and this pathogen was ubiquitous. They got on their boots, they went home to their gypsy moth populations, walked around, and this fungus appeared in 1995 to 2000 all over the East Coast. And it really is the magic bullet for killing gypsy moth, Lymantra despair. So again, an example of a pathogen from the area where the insect comes from. So pathogens are really good at controlling insects. Here is hemlock woolly adelgid. We don't have hemlocks here, but the Great Smoky has hemlocks, and their roots hold mountain streams together. And that's great trout fishing. And so it's a huge problem in the East, the Great Smoky National Park, Appalachian National Park. So they've been going overseas where hemlock woolly adelgid is from Japan, and looking for predators. So here they make this egg mass, and underneath it, you see the adelgid adults. And this is a fly that they've introduced to control it. Here's Adelgis tsuga, the European elm bark beetle. We know this issue. It killed all of our European elms. I mean, basically, they all got killed. People kept looking for resistant ones. Over the last 50 years, not much headway was made. The Princeton elm and everything was supposedly resistant, and then it came out. They were grafted on the roots of Siberian elm. Some of you probably know more about that than I. So right now, we don't really have any good resistant cultivars, and it's a shame that beautiful vase form. So we have had in the landscape, we've had elm bark beetle kill elm, Native American elms, and we've had the chestnut blight get rid of all the chestnuts. So we have had examples where we've lost tree species, and now emerald ash borer is decimating ash. So it can happen that there is such a population pressure that you're starting to lose the host tree. This is what I talked about, this Erwinia. This gets on honeybees, they vector it to the flowers, and this is the bacterial wilt, we call it. You could call it, you also can see it under the bark. It takes the trachea and it clogs it up. And so this was a favorite host of migratory birds, cedar waxwings, this time of year, and you hardly see. This is American ash. It's in the family Rosaceae. It's not in the Oleaceae like the like black ash or green ash. Here's birch leaf miner sawfly. Here's the sawfly. Again, filiform antennae. That is a sawfly, which is a hymenoptera. That's the adult. They lay their eggs and they grow inside the leaf. They used to be a huge problem in Minnesota, and then people started using imidacloprid to control them. And I don't hear much about them anymore, but it may be that there's so few ash trees in the environment that people want to manage. They don't like the Siberian ash as much as they did the Siberian. They don't like, exotic birch trees. I'm trying to find this little thing. they don't like the native birch as much as they did the exotic white birch, the white bark birch, the European white birch. And those are disappearing. Nobody bothered to add them back to landscapes when they were killed by the borer, the buprested borer, bronze birch borer. And so then you're taking out those European white birches, and the Native American birches are resistant to this. So you don't see many at all of these sawflies anymore. This is that Asian longhorn beetle. They're really big, and sometimes they have blue on them. This looks very like a science fiction movie, doesn't it? That's the pupae as it's turning into an adult. These are the coiled up. I think these are the trachea, the part of the digestive tract. Here's what the adult looks like. They chew and then they turn around and lay a hole. And here's one coming out of a hole. Again, these are round-headed borers, so you see the hole is round. That's a little distortion from the image. They come and go, and they're always killing them. USDA APHIS, the regulatory quarantine branch, is always there removing them. Here's Drosophila suzuki, which just appeared about 10 years ago. It's devastating berries. As you see in Minnesota, it got here about 2012. It spread across the country. This used to be some strawberries, and it's all larvae. And they're attracted to ethanol, but so far they're looking at, they pupate on the ground under the berry bushes, and they're looking at reflective mulches, things to heat up the soil under the commodities like blueberries or raspberries to kill them, but it's really hard to manage them with insecticides. Here's spot or lanternfly. You see it's in these areas where this Ailanthus like altissima, this Chinese tree of heaven, grows. It's not in Minnesota, but it's a real problem. This is how thick they get on the bark. They're actually very charismatic and pretty. It is a sucking insect, so it's like a cicada. And it's called spot or lanternfly. And this is what the damage looks like from all their mouth parts. And as we warm up, they could come and get in Minnesota. Here's brown marmorated stink bug, the damage it does on tomatoes or apples. That's come within the last few years. Again, this one is very difficult to control. We have native stink bugs, but they have spines that come out. And if you see a stink bug like this with no spines, then it's probably this marmorated stink bug. And here's these killer hornets that they're managing to suppress in Montana Washington State. Every time they find a population, they go out of their way to kill it. Here it's pulling honeybee larvae out of their cells. That's its favorite food. And they are huge. Asian giant hornet worker, Asian giant hornet the queen. Look at those mouth parts. They use those to pull the larvae of the honeybees out of the nests. And then here's was on our list at the bottom, jumping worms. They cause the soil, eat all the organic material, and this is what you get. They are here in Minnesota. The Department of Ag and the DNR doesn't know if they're gonna make a quarantine program for them, but they are a problem. They are an issue. So you'll hear about them more and more as they decide whether they should get a quarantine program. They have this very obvious clithium, and they thatch around. This is a European night crawler. Remember, all of these are exotic. Minnesota, from the glacier, didn't have earthworms, and these came in later. But this one came in used for fishing, and it's a problem because here you see a native area that has jumping worms, and there's no revegetation going on because they ruin the soil, they feed the roots. So I think we're done with this. We're going to talk in a few minutes about global change, but I just put this one in here. And nobody really can predict how global change is actually going to affect a certain species. We know it's going to cause increased number of generations. We know it's going to expand the geographic range because it's warmer. We know it's going to increase disease outbreaks. We know it's going to increase overwintering survival of both good bugs and bad bugs. We know it will desynchronize when the good bugs attack the bad bugs. And we know will affect the synchrony of when the pest insect emerges to feed on the plant. So they may not emerge when the plant is the tenderest. We know all of these things are going to be affected because plant growth is mediated by water, by drought, by light, by heat, but we can't predict yet what's going to happen. So that's going to be interesting to see how all these different dynamics occur. Well, I'm glad I could make a video to talk to you, and please go to those websites which are created to help you. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.
All right.
So I'm okay. So Cody, I'm going to leave. It's 3:18. Can we come back on 3:30 and do the next one?
Yeah, that sounds good.
I got to rest my voice for 15 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm
No worries.
on here. I'll stop recording. So yeah, they're still listening to us say this.